Hello, hello, and welcome back to Mind Your Body. I am so excited today to share this interview with you that I had with Nana Koch. She's been a dance therapist for almost 50 years, and she's just a wealth of knowledge and gentleness and inspiration. So I hope you enjoy this interview. And I also want to remind you that while you're waiting for podcasts to be published, to visit my website, mindyourbodydmt.com, because I put up so much goodies. I put up movement interventions and little videos of how to use movement in your own life to help you with your decision making, with procrastination, with pain, and just a lot of practical ways to use dance and movement, even if you're not used to dancing and moving and it's not a familiar place for you. And I also go live on my Facebook page every week, twice a week. It's Orit Krug Dance Movement Therapist. Just search that in the Facebook bar or the search bar and you'll find me. All right, so here we go. This is Mind Your Body, a dance movement therapy perspective on the integration of our emotional, cognitive, physical, and spiritual aspects of our being into one more aware and whole existence. Welcome, Nana, to Mind Your Body, and I'm really happy to have you here. You've been requested by several people. So it's great to have you here, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself and a little bit about your background as a dance therapist.
Great. Good morning. Thanks, Orit. So I'm Nana Koch, and it's really a pleasure to talk about my work because it's been decades since I began working as a dance therapist in 1971. Before we start, I also want to say that I've written several of my ideas out, so I might be doing a little bit of reading to really be as clear as possible about the work that I've been involved with for the last, I think it's 47 years. So I started, I can say that I've been dancing since I was 9 years old, which is at this point quite a long time. And so dance has really always been a very integral part of my life. And I decided that it was going to be a career path for me when I began to apply to colleges. And I was a dance major at Adelphi University, and really just loved the idea of being on stage. I was very dramatic. I wasn't a technically brilliant dancer, but I was very dramatic, so that there was something that I was always aware of. The expression that was coming from me was really central to why it was that I began to dance. And I had a very fortunate experience in, I guess it was probably the very beginning of my junior year in college, when I walked into a dance history class, and Elizabeth Polk was my dance history teacher. And that I had no idea when I walked into that class that it was going to change the course of my life. You know, I realized that I was not going to be a professional dancer, but there needed to be some part of dance that I could carry through into a profession. I had no idea before really meeting Elizabeth that it was going to be dance therapy. She introduced us to the field by inviting students to come and observe her classes when she was working at the Lexington School for the Deaf. And I don't recall too many other students actually taking her up on the opportunity to go and observe the sessions. But I do remember going by myself and walking into this room with this dynamic, exciting, joyful woman who was relating to children who could not hear her, but relating through the use of props, through the use of rhythm, through the use of stamping on her feet, so that the kids could really feel the rhythm going through their bodies from what they were experiencing in their feet. And all of a sudden, it just occurred to me that this was something that I could do. I knew that I wanted to be of service. I knew that I wanted to use dance. And there was Elizabeth offering me an opportunity to see a direction, to see a path that would really be useful for me. So from that experience, when I graduated, I ran into an old friend from my who was a classmate of mine who actually she graduated a year before me, and she had just enrolled in Lillian's course. Actually, I should say she had finished being enrolled in Lillian's course, and she said, "Why don't you check it out?" And I did, and that became, I spent the year of 1970 to 71 working with Lillian Espenak in her certification program. It was the first certification program that you could literally walk away with this diploma in your hand. Marion Chase, of course, had been doing courses, and in 1969, I had had the opportunity of taking Marion Chase's course, but instead I ran off to Colorado and taught dance at a girls' riding camp in the middle of the mountains. And sort of years later, I kicked myself realizing what I had missed, but little did I know that Marion was as prominent as she had been. So there I was enrolled in Lillian's course, and really finding a path that is where I've been for the last 47 years. Coincidentally, Lillian talked about Laban. She talked about Chase, but we really did not delve into the Chase work. I didn't do that until many years later when I took some workshops with Claire and Alyssa, Claire Schmace, Alyssa White. And then, of course, when I started working with Claire and Alyssa at Hunter College, which came starting in 1980. But from 1970, excuse me, 1971 until 1980, I worked as a clinician. And in that time, it became very apparent to me that I needed a language for describing my observations of client behavior. And Laban analysis seemed the way to go. So in 1978, I enrolled in the Laban Bartemyev Institute of Movement Studies and became a CMA. And what that afforded me was the language and the system and the language for organizing my perceptions. And that was really central for me to be able to speak to the doctors at rounds, at weekly rounds, about how I saw changes in the client's body over time. So that's really has been a very positive vehicle for me to codify, systematize, pull together my perceptions in a way where I can talk about client behavior. So for those 9 years in working in the field, I worked first at the Brooklyn Developmental Center, and I was the director of the dance therapy program, where I hired 3 other dance therapists. We all worked part-time. We worked, at least there was one day a week where we all worked together, so we could really discuss and sort of jointly supervise each other on our work. And that was a very fruitful, exciting time. I worked with Abby Cassell, Danny Frankel. That was where Danny and I first met. Marcia Perlmutter Kalina was another dance therapist. All of us are still in the field in one way or the other. Danny, of course, runs Connections, and we've been colleagues, and I've taught actually Lillian's work there for many years. So the beginning for me was a very fertile time. And working with what was then called retarded children, which now we speak about those with developmental delays, was a very important base of work for me, because it was very simple in some ways, and I really had to go to basics. It was all about using the body. Most of the children that we worked with, adolescents, didn't have verbal language. So understanding how to really use the movement to make a connection, because movement is our first basis of communication, was essential in laying for me the groundwork of that important dance, movement, connection, therapeutic alliance with a client who's nonverbal. And then from there, I went on to work at Fair Oaks Hospital in New Jersey. And that's a private hospital, and I worked with adolescents who had various forms of affective disorders, and I also worked on the addiction unit with drug addiction, alcohol addiction, addicted adults, and then there was also a unit for people who had breakdowns and depressive disorders. So my range of working with various patient populations was really very much well-rounded. I had also, I forgot, actually, after leaving Brooklyn Developmental Center, that first job, I worked at Pilgrim Psychiatric Hospital, and way back in the 1970s, there was literally stockpiling of patients in long-term hospitals, and so I worked at Pilgrim, which was a New York State hospital. I worked on a unit where people had been admitted probably 30, some of them 20, 30, for 30, 20 or 30 years. And those were chronic patients with range of schizophrenic disorders. So I've had a lot of different experiences that have really led me to be the therapist educator that I've been for the last 47 years.
Yeah, done a lot. That's
It's
really inspiring.
So that gives you some sense of where I've been and what I've been doing.
Definitely, and the picture that you painted in your first years is like, I could just see the story. It's nice to see.
It was really very exciting work because we really were at the sort of the beginnings of the profession, and it was we were talking about our work at conferences and really sharing what we learned, because every day was a learning experience. And I guess I basically lived my life in that same vein, which for me, regardless of what I know, there's always more to know and there's always more to learn. And so every day with every client is a new learning experience that can be shared and experienced over and over.
Yeah, I still feel that way all the time.
Well, it keeps going, so you have a couple more years.
I mean, different for you when you were just starting the career or the field, but yeah, like every day is a new learning experience.
It also, back in the 70s, jobs were plentiful. I mean, we created our own jobs. People were interested in seeing what we did and knowing how we could relate to clients in a way that verbal therapists and teachers sometimes had difficulty with, because they didn't have the language of mirroring, of empathy, of knowing how to reflect back, which is all that we learned in our dance therapy training.
Right. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, out of, all these years and all the different populations that you've worked with, what are your top guiding principles as a dance therapist?
Well, I've written a couple of them down, so if you don't mind, if I'm going to read them so I really get them right. I always start with the premise that the body reflects personality, and that through movement, our clients reveal their inner life. So that's the basis of my work. That's really the cornerstone for me. And that movement is a basic form of communication, and basically as such, we're helping clients to, through their body and through stimulating activity, to help them to reveal themselves. So this serves for me to help the client to recognize where their energy blocks are, where they need to focus in order to release the unconscious emotions within. Another principle is that through movement and dance experiences, so emotions, they're stimulated. So the stimulation of emotions is really an important premise for me. I always, when I'm teaching, I always talk to students about, ask them what they do when they're trying to hold back emotions. And everybody always says, I hold my breath, I clench, I tense myself. And then we start to move when I'm leading a session with students, and all of a sudden they're breathing and they're experiencing their bodies in a new way. They're experiencing their emotions. So for me, it's really the stimulus of activity, which Marion Chase talks about as bodily action at the very beginning of a session. So that really is another premise that motivates me. And in the group setting, which I do, when I was working, I worked a lot in groups. I always wanted to provide opportunities, because I should say it this way: groups provide an opportunity for socialization and also for developing community. And another real guiding principle for me is the importance of looking at a group as a system. and looking at all of our interactions as a system. My doctoral studies, I worked with anthropologists and sociologists, and the courses that I took really helped me to understand that we jointly coordinate ourselves whenever we're in interaction with another. We organize how we interact, and because we're part of a system, and that system needs to be looked at. So I look at, there's the bodily action as a stimulus for emotion. There's a sense of how we jointly organize each other. There's the therapeutic relationship between you and me and the client. Those kind of all come together for me as sort of being the bedrock of my work.
And then kind of that speaking of the system, that every action causes a reaction kind of thing.
Every action causes a reaction, but we're not always sure what that reaction is unless we really look at it with some systematic way. Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess I like to talk about it as that there's a joint interaction, that we jointly coordinate each other in an interaction. And in my doctoral studies, I did a lot of frame by frame analysis. And if you look at even what you and I are doing together, as we're looking at each other and we're shaking our heads together, right? We're letting each other know that we are in agreement. So there's something about this joint interaction. We're giving each other cues. And sometimes it's not always even a reaction, it's a joint experience together at the same time. We can sort of feel. So
yeah, important distinction there.
Yeah. So I think that's sort of what the basic premise, that the body reflects personality. Stimulate the body, and you stimulate the mind, and you stimulate the flow of emotions. We jointly, systematically organize each other.
Yeah. And hearing that is like really, really easy to understand, because dance therapy can be so abstract, and the work that we do can be really abstract. So I like how you put that into kind of more understandable words. And it's like the foundation, like I hear a lot of foundational concepts that you're putting there into the work. So that's important.
And one other foundational concept is, and this is really what I learned from all of the women that I studied with, never forget that the dance is the most powerful connection between us. So running through the idea that the body reflects personality, it's the body is reflecting personality in the dance of the individual, in the movement of the individual. So never forgetting that's the bedrock. We're movers, we're dancers, and we use that as a means of communication.
And thank you for saying that, because I've gone through my own personal roller coaster with that, and I know that other people have, of like using the word dance, and like for me there's almost been a kind of shame associated with it, because I think I take on, like, that's kind of like the countertransference I take on from when I say dance or dance therapy, and there's a lot that comes up with that word. So I've played with stepping back from it, and now I'm in this phase of like, I'm embracing it, and this is my selling point as my practice and my business. But it feels so much better to come back to it, because that is, I'm assuming for everyone listening as well, is like what drew us in to this field.
It's interesting, the use of the word. When I was working at Fair Oaks Hospital with adolescents, it was really hard to call our dance therapy groups dance therapy, because adolescents, it didn't resonate for them. So that was a time when I was happy that I had the word movement therapy also. And actually, I didn't even call them therapy groups, I called them movement groups. And I worked with an art therapist so that they were the creative arts groups. And sometimes we would be drawing, and then we would be moving our drawings, and then sometimes we would be using clay and creating sculptures, and then they would three-dimensionalize their sculptures into a movement dialogue between themselves and their whatever they created. So I always needed to know who my audience was in order to be able to capture the attention.
Right.
But I do consider myself a dance therapist, and I do say that. And often it's at a dinner party. It can be a sentence stopper. You're a what?
Or it's like, oh, okay.
Okay, let's move on. Oh, and of course, I never let them move on. So
I'm going to advocate right now. Yeah. And like that's a good point of we can change the language based on the people we're working with, but when we come back to ourselves and our purpose and our passion, I feel like dance is so important there. Like the word has to be there, and it's important for us to do it on our own too, for ourselves, and keep dancing, keep moving. Yeah. So you were talking about being trained or training with Lillian Espenak. And other early founders. So I'm wondering, what are the most valuable things that they taught you that still impacts you today, and how I don't know if you practice still, but in the way that you teach.
I'm not practicing clinically, but I am teaching. And I have been known to be the person who teaches Lillian Espenak's work. And I've brought that work actually to India, to Japan, to China. I'm actually leaving in a couple of weeks to go to Beijing to teach at the Apollo Education and Consulting in Beijing. And I'm going to be teaching Lillian's work along with talking about group process and dance therapy. And I'll also be going to Hong Kong after that to be teaching at the university, also Lillian's work. So yes, Lillian has been one of the most essential influences in my life. But I want to just, before talking about Lillian and that influence, it's also important to talk about the work that I did with Elizabeth, because Elizabeth was an incredibly joyful woman, and she was she had a really positive outlook on the world. And I'm indebted to her for helping me realize that I could use dance in the service of working with others, but also that the personal quality of being joyful, the personal quality of being positive in working specifically with children means that you're bringing your best self to the client, that you're bringing a sense of vitality to the client. And really from Elizabeth, I understood the power of being vital in myself and understanding where my own positive energy was coming from. So that's really a debt that I give to her. Or not a debt. It's a that influence from her modeling joyful, positive energy is really, it's part of everything that I do. And I try to bring that best self wherever I go. The other thing that Elizabeth was really spectacular on was understanding about how to be so respectful to children. She never spoke down to them. It was always that they had something to offer her, she had something to offer them. And no matter how incapacitated or handicapped they were, she always wanted us students to remember that even if you can't express your feeling, it's in there somewhere, and it's for you, the therapist, to draw it out. So that's been a guiding remembrance for me. Joyful, bring the positive, and really capture what the client can do as opposed to what the client can't
do. Right. And can I ask you where you tend to draw your joy and positive energy from? Like, is there something that you do regularly, or like I just want to know, like what?
Well, I dance. I take an Eric Hawkins dance class every Friday. And I do that. Tina Erfer and I, and you might know Tina. Tina and Erfer and I take that class together, along with actually Joan Berkowitz, who's another dance therapist. And then we go to lunch together and talk about our lives. And then I take several yoga classes a week, and I hike. I do a lot of hiking, and I find that when I hike, I think a lot. It's my meditation. Um, so I sort of I try to treat myself to something every day that gives me something positive. And whether that's just simply walking out my door. I live in a house that's surrounded by trees, and sometimes I literally just walk outside and I will look around and understand and really feel very grateful for the work that I've chosen and the life that I have. So I think it's about somehow capturing and recognizing how grateful I need to be, because I have a lot that has been given to me and I've been able to give it back.
Nice. And with body and movement too, like there's the common thread.
Always the common thread. Moving is always the common thread.
Yeah.
It was, I remember my mother saying, "Is there any way to get you to sit down?" And I'd say, "I don't think so." So movement has always been part of my life, and it's always been a central need for me.
Mm. Great.
And I guess the other piece is that it's really important to find a community of people who you can connect with. And I've been very lucky in having a professional community and a personal community, because I think that connecting with other people is a really essential piece of living.
Yeah.
So I think that that's been sustaining as well.
Definitely. So yeah, I cut you off with that question, but and you were gonna.
No, that's okay.
Thanks for sharing. I just know it's a big theme that keeps coming back through all the podcasts of like what to do, how to take care of yourself. Like the word self-care is thrown around a lot, and I like to get down to specifics.
Oh, absolutely. And that was one of the things that I was going to end with, which is how important it is, for especially in our work, to really nurture yourself in some way. Do something every day that gives you some pleasure, because the work can be very exhausting and draining, but also it's energizing at the same time. So dance, relax, take care of yourself by whatever means provides you with an opportunity for joyfulness. And Lillian, I'm going to speak about her in a minute. Lillian talked a lot about kind of capturing the vitality. Actually, Claire Schmace also talked about, when she talked about healing factors, really capturing the vitality of an individual. So many clients that I've worked with have been really, they're alienated from society. They're not connected, and that they've lost their vitality because, as Lillian would say, their sense of personal drive, a personal freedom, has really been suppressed. And when we're suppressed, our vitality drains from us. So finding a way to keep yourself vital and finding a way to keep your energy vital is really essential. And if I can find it for myself, I can also perhaps help others. And that's another premise underlying my work.
Right. Yeah.
So I've sort of veered a little bit, but that sort of leads me into the work of Lillian, who in her in her sense of being a pioneer, really understood deeply how the use of dance, how the use of improvisation really leads to the revelation of your inner life. She worked with Mary Wigman, who was all about the expression of emotion. And as Lillian would say about emotion, is not always pretty. And so that for Lillian, it didn't matter whether it was pretty or whether it was, obviously, if you're coming into therapy, you're not coming in because you're feeling great, but really helping the client to dig down through a series of exercises um, and directives on how to really sort of, or she went about in her series of directives to help clients to find that emotional life that was perhaps hidden and suppressed. So I think she was probably the first person to develop a codified, systematic way of looking at treatment, and she talks about it actually in her book called Psychomotor Therapy, dance therapy theory and practice, which I believe is out of print, but for me is one of the most insightful books about the work that we do. And she talks about it as a two-part system, but I actually talk about it as a three-part system for treatment. And it really resonates for me because it focuses on diagnosis, and then it focuses on restructuring, and then it focuses on the integration of the individual. Lillian developed what I believe is the first first assessment tool, which she called the movement diagnostic tests. And while they were identified as tests, I always call them the movement diagnostic assessments, because they really ascertain where a client starts in their bodies. And she looked at these very simple, there are 8 very simple tests that she actually developed when she started working at the mental retardation clinic at Flower Fifth Avenue Hospital, which is where her certification course was taught. So we studied for 1 year. We spent time in the mental retardation clinic for part of the week, and then we spent time, actually 1 day a week, in her studio doing all the improvisational work that became characteristic of her last phase of treatment, which was integration. So let me just go back to talk a bit about her movement diagnostic tests, because they really looked at a client's drive, a client's coordination, their impulse control, their courage, and their ability for emotional expression. And in administering these tests, the simplicity of them really gives you a baseline for understanding those categories, drive, coordination, impulse control, courage, and ability to express. And I really like these tests because they reveal where the blockages are in the body and where the blockages are emotionally. So that's the first part of the system that Lillian talked about, that I sort of rarely walk into any therapeutic situation without thinking diagnosis, assessment, what's going on. Because that, again, gives me an understanding of where to go. And if you're a kind of therapist that is goal-driven, which these days in the way the medical system is functioning, we need to be able to show change. And so if you start with an assessment, and this very simple assessment, and then you look at it over time, then you can understand change. Lillian also believed very much in what she called the restructuring part of her sessions, or the restructuring part of her treatment. And in the restructuring second part, she developed a series of physical exercises designed to really help the client open up their body blocks. Lillian worked with Alexander Lowen, who is a Reichian therapist in his bioenergetic work. And there was a lot of focus on really looking at where armor was located. And, from the diagnostic and understanding where those blocks were, she could literally prescribe certain physical exercises that she developed that would help to free the body of strictures, of whatever constrictions there were, and helping the client to feel more bodily freedom. And her idea, of course, was when you feel more bodily freedom, then you're able to express yourself to a greater extent. So there you've got diagnosis, and from that, she'd understand where to take the restructuring exercises and help you to remove those blocks. Blanche Evan found the same way. She talked about functional technique, that there were some parallels in what Lillian was doing and what some of other dance therapists were doing. But Lillian talked about it as restructuring. Blanche talked about it as functional technique. Bartinia came up with Bartinia fundamentals. So there was a thread, I think, running through that, through some of those earlier dance therapists who were working simultaneously. The restructuring gave way to Lillian's third part of her system, which she called integration. And there she drew on the dance so poignantly, because it was really all about designing or helping the client to sort of develop their own understanding of where their emotional life laid in their body, where it was held in their body. And she used improvisation. She used mask work. She used a lot of props. She always had props in the office. I mean, in the studio. She used musical instruments. From her perspective, anything that a client needed in order to be able to release their emotional life through movement was what they could do. So integration was also about, in this improvisational work, unleashing what Lillian called the four emotions most common in man. She talked about anger, calm, joy, and fear. And so all of her work was really about unleashing that, along with, when you find calm, how you find the vitality in your life, and how you find the personality that you can bring into the world that will be more integrated. So overall, that was the lens that she looked through, and it's the lens from which I have looked when I am doing therapeutic work. So there I, put together with Elizabeth's understanding, or my the model of Elizabeth, of being sort of the positive. Let's take what the client can do, being joyful, being present, bringing my best self, and then understanding how to look at client behavior and help them through a process. So I think, and which is why I teach Lillian's work all the time, because I think it's just, it's brilliant in its way of seeing the client as the sort of the holistic part of a way of holistically looking at a client from beginning of treatment to the end. Mm-hmm. And it's resonated for me, which is why I teach it.
Yeah, I'm really interested. Like, is there anywhere to learn more about this?
Well, actually, I'm going to be teaching Lillian's work. Well, I'll be in Beijing in October. I'll be in Hong Kong also in October, and I'll be teaching at Connections in Rochester in April. I think it's the last week of April. If anybody's interested, they can actually go on the Connections website, and I believe that Danny may have already identified the dates. Mm-hmm. So I believe it's a 30-hour course. We do over 4 days, and we do a little bit. We do about 4 hours online at the end of the class. People have to administer a movement diagnostic test and then do an evaluation and a treatment plan. So go to Connections website. Yeah, that would be valuable. But I want to say one more thing in regards to influence. So while Elizabeth and Lillian, really, their work formed the basis of my own, 2 other women have been enormously influential in my own development as a therapist and professional and teacher and educator. And that's Claire Schmace and Alyssa White. And my colleagues, my friends, my dear hearts. And I worked at Hunter College after I left Fair Oaks Hospital. I guess it was Fair Oaks. I went to teach at Hunter, where I was for 17 years. But prior, I had studied with, I'd taken several workshops and chase work with Alyssa and with Claire. And, and Lillian did a little bit of talking about chase. We did some development of sessions, but it was really when I met Claire and Alyssa that I fully understood the power of using chase work as when you're working with groups. And I really have specialized in working with group and understanding group process. It again, my understanding of systems dynamics, the chase work fit in very well with how interested I am and was in systems. So um, I really learned how to create from Alyssa, and both watching Alyssa and Claire work, how to create a safe space by really meeting clients' needs in the moment. I came to understand, watching Alyssa, if anybody has ever watched her lead a dance therapy group, about the importance of smooth transitions and how to enact them. I think you probably had Alyssa when you were at Koch. So you know what I'm talking about when we talk about the transitions between the movements. And also how important it is just to keep the movement going in the session while connecting with each client and meeting their needs. I used a videotape of a dance therapy session that Alyssa ran for my own doctoral dissertation. And in teasing it apart, I was so struck and how much I learned about connecting to each client, calling their names, bringing them in, picking up their movements very subtly, and then developing them like a dancer would and developing a combination. So their influences in showing me the power of really using bodily action and rhythm and making a therapeutic alliance, which is what Shakelin and Schmace wrote about when they talked about the Chasian session. From Claire, I always talk about the healing factors of dance therapy, and without that influence, that wouldn't have possibly would not have come into my own lexicon of how I work and what I talk about. Claire's writings on group process, I use those articles all the time because they're central to an understanding of the warm-up and the development and the closure of a session. So the power of their alliance together helped me to understand, and their early work with Marion, really has helped me to understand over the years how essential the dance is. I know Claire and Alyssa, as Lillian did, as Elizabeth, always focused on the dance and the essential nature of what it is that we do when we're together with another person in a session.
Yeah.
So each one of these women supported my understanding of the work that I do now.
Yeah.
Lucky me, right?
Yeah. I know. Like, I feel so honored to talk to you, and I feel like the way that you just described that was so beautiful, like pulling those really important pieces from each person, from each person who mentored you and inspired you. So thank you.
That's how legacy goes. If that legacy is really important, because what we take from our mentors and our teachers, and if we use it well, then we have an opportunity of really passing on really best practices.
Right.
And I feel like that's what I'm trying to do in talking about Lillian's work, is promoting best practices, and in also acknowledging my own background and my own mentors.
Right. Well, we got to wrap up soon, but I wanted to know what are, you already said one piece of advice, so two other pieces of advice for dance movement therapists today, whether they're new, seasoned, or anywhere in between.
Okay, I wrote this down because I think it's really important. So remember always that dance and movement are the basic forms of communication we use in our work. And through this medium of dance, people reveal their innermost life. Always remember the dance is there. Keep the dance alive in your practice. Keep it alive in your daily lives. Keep it alive forever, because there is much power in movement. This for me, this is really important. It's know yourself, know your strengths, know your source of your own vitality, and also your own challenges. Don't be afraid to get supervision when you feel that you need to go more deeply into your own process or more deeply into understanding how to work with others. So it's really knowing yourself, and seek out people who can help you move through your own challenges. Always remember how important it is to build a safe environment for your clients. And therefore, I think it's really important to be an observer, to be patient, to really watch what's going on, and not bringing your own stuff into what you're seeing, but really opening up your eyes, leaving your own inner dialogue about yourself behind, and really seeing. Clients want to be seen, they want to be heard. And it's your job to open up your eyes to really take in what they're giving you. So remember that. And then keep dancing, renew yourself. Do something every day that you feel is going to be nurturing. Because the work is challenging and the work is exciting, but the work is also tiring. So find a way of renewing yourself and use your own power of movement to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. I got to be honest, I woke up feeling pretty self-doubtful today, and hearing you say that has just lit me up, and everything else that you've talked about has been really inspiring today.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
And I'm very appreciative to be able to talk about this.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing.
Oh,
So
my pleasure.
Is there any other way we can follow you, and where you're teaching and all that? Do you have
you know that the American Dance Therapy Association has a calendar of alternate route courses, and Barbara Nordstrom Loeb is the one who's in charge of that calendar. And I usually put down where I'm working on that. You can send me an email if you want to know more about my work. nana59@aol.com, nana59@aol.com.
Great.
I love to talk about Lillian's work, and I'm always willing to travel to do that.
Great. Good to know. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Same here. Thank you so much, Orit.
Yep. Bye.